He was 2 weeks away from closing the doors permanently, and he almost hung up on the phone call that changed everything. That man was Paul Brown, the owner of Gallery 63 in Atlanta, Georgia, and the face of one of Discovery Channel's most quietly authentic reality shows. By the time you finish this video, you'll understand exactly why Auction Kings ended, what happened to every person in that building when the camera stopped rolling, and why the gallery that almost died in 2009 is still running today. Paul Brown did not grow up dreaming about auctions. He grew up inside them and spent most of his early life trying to get out. His grandmother started the family's antique business. His father, Bob Brown, built it into something real at Red Baron Antiques in Roswell, Georgia, a sprawling operation that specialized in antique furniture and became a fixture in the Atlanta antiques world. Paul was surrounded by all of it from childhood. He watched his father move through estate sales, negotiate on pieces, read the room during a bid, and he wanted none of it. He went to college to study English literature. The plan was to become a teacher, maybe a playwright. He had an academic mind, the kind that could trace the provenance of an obscure object back 3 centuries just by reading about it. But his ambition pointed somewhere else entirely. What he actually did, after college, was work at a car wash. That is not a metaphor. That is what happened. Paul Brown washed cars. The path back to the family trade was slow and practical. His wife at the time was pregnant. Bills existed. His father needed help. Paul took a job at Red Baron Antiques in 1989, not because he had found his calling, but because he needed to work. What he brought to the job, though, was that English lit research brain. While other dealers in the industry were operating on instinct and experience, Paul was digging, reading about pieces, finding the backstory, realizing, gradually, that information was the real currency in the antique business, not the item, the story behind it. Gallery 63 was, at that point, a small clearinghouse attached to Red Baron. Paul's own description of it was blunt: a clearinghouse for them, and we'd sell box lots of household goods and cheap furniture all day long. It barely made money, but he always saw potential in it. And if you think the potential he saw was modest, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. By 2009, Paul Brown had been running Gallery 63 for 4 years. He had bought it as a standalone business in 2005, taken it up market, and built it into a genuine auction house. But 2009 was a brutal year. The economy had collapsed. Discretionary spending on antiques and collectibles dried up. Paul Brown was doing the math on whether Gallery 63 could survive, and the math was not going well. In September of that year, a phone rang in Atlanta. It was a production company calling from Los Angeles. Paul Brown thought it was a sales call. He hung up. They called back. This time, they explained what they were looking for: an auction house to build a Discovery Channel reality show around. They had been searching across the country. They had looked at a lot of galleries, and they kept coming back to Gallery 63. They sent him a flip camera, not a crew, not a contract. A flip camera and a request to film a normal day at the gallery and mail it back. Paul did exactly that. He filmed his staff, the floor, the auction, the chaos of intake day. He mailed the camera back to Los Angeles. 2 days later, they called him again. Discovery had watched the footage and loved it. Not just liked it, they greenlit 26 episodes before a pilot had ever aired. 26. That number is significant in television terms. It's a staggering commitment to an unproven concept, and it almost never happens on a first deal. There was one other thing Paul insisted on before they started. The production company had a name for the show already: Bitter Rivals. Paul Brown thought that was wrong. Auctions are not about rivalry. They're collaborative, theatrical, communal. He pushed for a different name. He got it. The show became Auction Kings. The premiere on October 26, 2010, drew strong numbers. Viewers who had never once thought about antiques were suddenly watching a team of people in Atlanta try to figure out if a vampire-killing kit was real and how much a hot air balloon would bring on the block. The show found its audience fast. But here's the part that changes everything about what you just heard. Auction Kings was built on a specific tension that most reality shows spend enormous energy trying to manufacture artificially. Every other show in the auction and antique space, and there were several by 2010, controlled the drama. They scripted the deals. They knew what the items were before the cameras rolled. They prearranged the negotiations. Gallery 63 could not do that. Auctions are structurally uncertain. You cannot know what something will bring. Paul Brown described it directly. Sometimes the team would follow an item they were certain would set a record, only to watch it fizzle on the block. Other times, a piece that seemed ordinary would create a bidding war that surprised everyone in the room. That was the show's greatest strength and its genuine operational challenge for the producers. Discovery wanted television. Television wants known outcomes. Auctions have no known outcomes. Every production week was a negotiation between the network's need for narrative structure and the reality of what actually happens when a gavel falls. The core cast held the whole thing together. Paul Brown on the floor, confident, accessible, the kind of guy who refused to wear a suit because he'd ruin it unloading a truck. Cindy Shook running inventory, a woman who had started her career cleaning furniture at Red Baron Antiques in the early 1990s and worked her way up to managing every piece that came through the door of Gallery 63. John Hammond as the picker, a college English major who beat nearly 100 other applicants for the assistant manager position. Delfino Ramos as the repairman, the person Paul consistently described as someone who could fix literally anything, whose work directly increased the value of every item he touched. Season 3 added 2 more names, the Garrett brothers from Michigan, Steve and Ernie, who toured antique fairs and estate sales looking for items to bring to auction, and Dr. Lori Verderam, a former museum director and university professor who brought genuine academic appraisal to the floor. 96 episodes across 4 seasons. The final one aired on May 16, 2013, and that's when the decision was made, the one nobody around the show saw coming. Discovery Channel never released an official statement explaining why Auction Kings ended after Season 4. That silence has fed years of speculation. The real picture is more nuanced than any single answer can capture. The show's structural problem, real unpredictability in an industry that needs controlled production, never entirely went away. Discovery had other auction and antique properties competing for the same audience space. Pawn Stars on the History Channel was dominant. Storage Wars had launched. The genre was crowded. Auction Kings was authentic, where those shows were increasingly theatrical. But authentic doesn't always win in a ratings environment shaped by theatrical. Paul Brown himself was candid about the dynamic between the gallery and the production process. The network could accommodate uncertainty up to a point, but sustaining that across 96 episodes required the team to constantly generate interesting material on an auction floor that operated on its own schedule, not a production calendar. There were also the economics of the gallery itself. During filming, Gallery 63 operated with an entire production crew embedded in the space every week. That changes how a business functions. The operational reality of being a working auction house and a Discovery Channel set simultaneously created pressures that weren't visible on screen. When production ended in 2013, Paul Brown did not retreat into Gallery 63. He did something that surprised people who had followed him for 4 seasons on television. He left. He signed on to host a new show for GAC, Great American Country, called Endless Yard Sale. The concept involved traveling across the country to buy and sell at large-scale outdoor sales events. The pilot aired in early 2015. The show was greenlit for a full season. It required extensive travel, enough that Paul made the decision to lease out the Gallery 63 property entirely and devote himself to the new project. In other words, he had, by 2015, effectively walked away from the auction business. The gallery that had almost closed in 2009, that had become nationally known because of Auction Kings, was on hiatus while its founder was somewhere else. Most people who know this story stop here, but the real story starts right now. Paul Brown was deep into production on Endless Yard Sale when his phone rang again. This time, the caller was not a television producer. It was a longtime consignor, a jewelry wholesaler who had worked with Gallery 63 for 4 decades. The man told Paul he was retiring. He wanted to sail, he said. He was going to sit on a boat, and before he did any of that, he needed someone to liquidate his entire inventory. Roughly 150 lots of high-end jewelry, pieces by Tiffany, Cartier, Rolex, David Yurman, decades of a professional collection, being handed to one man to sell. Paul Brown came back. The auction was held on February 5, 2016, at Gallery 63's Buckhead facility, the same room where all 97 episodes of Auction Kings had been shot. Several original cast members from the show appeared, including Cindy Shook, who was still connected to the gallery's world. The sale drew bidders who had watched the show, and a new wave of buyers who came specifically for the jewelry. After that, Gallery 63's path forward clarified. Paul began stepping back from day-to-day operations, moving into an advisory role. His son Elijah, who had appeared on Auction Kings as a teenager, learning the business in the background, began taking on more responsibility. In 2017, Elijah Brown formally took over ownership of Gallery 63. The 4th generation of the family was now running the business. Paul Brown had survived the show, survived the exit, survived the attempt at a second television career, and survived something far more serious. In 2018, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. The diagnosis came early enough that treatment was possible. He recovered. He had married Linda Wood in November 2011, and they remained together through all of it. One phone call, one conversation. That's all it took to change the direction of everything. When a reality show ends, the cameras move on. Most coverage of Auction Kings stops at Paul Brown. But what happened to the people who made that gallery feel like a place, not just a set? Cindy Shook ran Gallery 63's entire inventory operation for over 2 decades. She started as a furniture cleaner at Red Baron Antiques in the early 1990s, entry-level, practical work, and spent the next 30 years becoming indispensable. By the time Auction Kings was airing, she was the institutional memory of the place. Every item that came through the door was tagged, cataloged, and tracked by Cindy. She also appeared in the 2015 film production Prodigal, The Aftermath, stepping briefly into scripted work after the show. Cindy Shook passed away in February 2021. She was part of the Gallery 63 family for essentially her entire adult working life. John Hammond, the picker and assistant manager who had beaten nearly 100 applicants for his position, chose a different direction entirely after the show. He stepped back from the public eye. No new television projects, no social media presence tied to the antique world. He focused on his family, his wife and 3 children. For someone who was on national television for 4 seasons, the choice to walk away from that attention completely is its own kind of statement. The Garrett brothers, Ernie and Steve, were perhaps the most candid of anyone in the cast about their motivations. When asked in an interview with a Michigan newspaper why they were doing a television show, Ernie Garrett said, "We are not on the show because we want to be on TV or to be famous or anything. The only reason we are doing this is for the money." After the show, Ernie pitched a new concept to Discovery Channel. It was filmed as a pilot under the working title Treasure Chase. It never aired. Today, both brothers remain co-owners of Garrett Brothers Antiques and Collectibles in Ray, Michigan. Delfino Ramos, the repairman Paul Brown called irreplaceable, has kept a quiet profile. He lists Gallery 63 as his employer, and accounts from people connected to the gallery indicate he has remained part of the operation in some capacity. His last public social media post was in 2014. Some people simply don't want the attention. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. The building on Roswell Road in Sandy Springs where Auction Kings was filmed is gone from daily foot traffic. Gallery 63 relocated after the show, and the current space is open only by appointment. The operation that once filled a room with live bidders every week has shifted primarily online. That shift is not decline. It is adaptation. Under Elijah Brown, Gallery 63 conducts regular monthly estate auctions through its website. The inventory mix has moved upmarket: fine jewelry, high-end decorative arts, designer goods, luxury watches, and vintage items with documented provenance. A Rolex Submariner, sold at the April 2021 Spring Estate Auction, brought $18,000 against a pre-sale estimate of $8,000 to $10,000. A Cartier-attributed bracelet sold for $34,100 in December 2020. These are not the box lots of household goods Paul Brown described from the gallery's earliest days. Elijah Brown also runs a YouTube channel, an irony that does not escape anyone who watched a teenager hold items up for bidders on national television and now watches him do the same thing, voluntarily, for an online audience. He has talked publicly about his approach to the business and his interest in comedy and art, alongside the auction work. He is the 4th generation of a family that has been in the antiques trade since his great-grandmother's era. Paul Brown, as of 2025-2026, maintains what he describes as an advisory interest in Gallery 63. His last documented public appearance at a gallery sale was the Spring Estate Auction in April 2021. He has not announced new television projects. After a career that moved from a car wash to a clearinghouse to national television to a cancer diagnosis and back, the current chapter appears to be one of deliberate quiet. The show that ran for 96 episodes between 2010 and 2013 still reaches new viewers through syndication on Quest TV and streaming platforms. People who were not alive when Auction Kings premiered are now watching it for the first time and asking the same question: what happened to those people? What happened to that gallery? Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got. Until now, Auction Kings was not the most watched show in its genre. Pawn Stars averaged more viewers. Storage Wars generated more tabloid heat. American Pickers ran longer. But the people who watched Auction Kings consistently describe it as the most honest of that entire wave of antique and collectibles reality television that dominated cable from 2009 to 2015. There's a reason for that. Most of those shows were constructed around a fundamental deception: The premise that outcomes were uncertain when, in many cases, deals had been prearranged, appraisals had been predetermined, and the drama had been engineered in post-production. Auction kings could not do that. The bids were real. The appraisals were real. The items came in without a script attached. When something sold for less than expected, the disappointment was genuine. When a dark horse lot surprised everyone on the floor, nobody was acting. Paul Brown described auctions as theaters of capitalism before the show ever existed, a phrase that captures something true about what makes a live auction work. There is actual tension in that room. The seller is nervous. The buyer is nervous. The auctioneer is reading a crowd and making decisions in real time. No producer in Los Angeles can control what happens when a gavel falls. That authenticity came at a cost. It made the show harder to produce, harder to sustain across seasons, and harder to fit into the conventional reality television format Discovery needed. It may also be exactly why the show lasted 4 seasons instead of 12, and why the people who found it remember it the way they do. Gallery 63 was founded in 1995. Paul Brown bought it in 2005. It nearly closed in 2009. A phone call saved it. A television show made it famous. The show ended. The owner left, came back, survived cancer, handed the keys to his son, and stepped back. The office manager who started as a furniture cleaner and gave 30 years to that place is gone. The picker went quiet. The brothers from Michigan are still picking in Ray, Michigan. The gallery is still running. What Auction Kings showed, across 96 episodes of a show that almost didn't get made, is that the most durable businesses are the ones built around people who actually know what they're doing, not people performing the idea of it. Gallery 63 is still holding auctions in 2026 because the knowledge inside that building outlasted the cameras. Elijah Brown is now the 4th generation to run it. His grandfather Bob built Red Baron. His father Paul transformed Gallery 63 from a furniture clearinghouse into a nationally recognized auction house and then stepped away on his own terms. Elijah is doing the work now. Monthly auctions, a YouTube presence, a business moving forward in a world where most of its competition has been replaced by algorithm-driven platforms. Paul Brown is in an advisory role, watching his son run the family trade the same way his own father once watched him. Would you have walked away from Gallery 63 the way Paul Brown did after the show ended, trusting that someone else could carry it forward? Or would you have stayed and held on? Let us know in the comments below.